Hi. Um, Today we're going to talk about the first chapter of Flamingo, which is the last lesson. It was written by Alphonse Daudet. He was a French novelist and a short story writer. So um, this chapter is describes Franco-Prussian War. So the war between France and Prussia. Prussia was like a state which consisted of Germany, Poland, and parts of Austria. France. So in this war, what happens is France was defeated by Prussia, led by Bismarck. So who was Bismarck? He was a guy who actually, united these all of the states, and he was the first chancellor of that unification of Germany, right? So this war was led by that person. So in this story, what happens is the French districts of Alsace and Lorraine. There are two districts named Alsace and Lorraine. They are French. They belong to France, but they fall into the Prussian hands. So the Prussia actually conquers these two districts. Now, in that particular state, what happened to the school life? What would the school life be like? It is described in what would be the effect of such a thing into the school life. It is described into this particular story. So this story is about a little schoolboy named Franz. So he says that he is the narrator of the story. So he says that he started to school that morning very late, and he was afraid. It says that in great dread of scolding. Great dread of means he was greatly afraid that he would be scolded, especially because he says that M. Hamel had said that he would question them on participles. What are participles? Participles are like when you use a verb as an adjective, that is called as participles. For example, a working woman. So work is a verb, working woman, it becomes an adjective, working woman. So, and he says that I didn't know the first word about them. So he says that for one moment he thinks about running away because whatever was outside, he says that it was a bright sunny day, and it was so warm, the birds was chirping at the edge of the woods, and he says that he witnesses that in the open field in the back of the sawmill, the Prussian soldiers were drilling. So drilling is like when the army soldiers are actually given instruction or command. It looks it's an army drill, right? So the training of the army that is going on, and he says that it was so much tempting, it was so much compelling than the rule of participles. He says, but I had the strength to resist. So he says, but I had the strength to resist, and he was just hurrying off to school. And then he passes down the town hall. There was a crowd, and he witnesses the crowd in front of the bulletin board. What is a bulletin board? Bulletin board, in the previous times when there were almost no newspapers, so there used to be bulletin boards, the places where news used to come to, right? Or they used to be newspapers actually attached there, actually pinned there on the bulletin board, so that everyone could actually see it. And so he says when he passed through it, there was a crowd in front of it. So he says that for the last 2 years, all of the bad news, because that brings the news, and news were always bad. So he says that all of the bad news has come from there. He talks about that the lost battles, the drafts, the orders of the commanding officer, and he says that he talks to himself, and he says, what could be the matter now? And then he says that he was still going very fast. So when there was the blacksmith Wachter who was there with his apprentice, who was reading the bulletin, and he called him and he says, don't go so fast, bub. You will get to your school in plenty of time. Bub is actually a word that we use for a kid who is in the preparation year. So he says that he thought that the blacksmith was actually making fun of him, and then he reached M. Hamel's garden. M. Hamel is the name of the instructor. And then he says that usually what happens when the school used to begin, there was a great bustle, great noises going on that could be heard out on the street, the opening and closing of the desks, lessons repeated in unison. Unison is like when you like everybody is saying the same thing at the same time, right? So lessons repeated in unison, very loud, and with our hands over our ears so we could understand better. So yeah, have you ever tried it? Try it. And then he says, and the teacher's great ruler rapping on the table. Ruler is the stick. So he says, but now it was all so still. Everything was so still. He says that I had counted on the commotion to get to my desk without being seen. That I had counted, when you count on something, that means you depend on something, that yeah, there would be commotion, and yeah, I will take advantage of this and I'll just get to my desk. Commotion is like a confused, noisy state, right? So he thought that maybe there would be so much noise and I'll just simply slip to my desk. But he said, but of course that day everything had to be quiet as Sunday morning. So said, but that day had to be as quiet. He's saying that because I was late, that's why, see, everything, nothing is in his favor, everything is just as quiet as Sunday morning. Now he says that through the window he saw his classmates already in their places, and M. Hamel, who was walking up and down, that means one way to another, with his terrible iron ruler under his arm. So he says that he had to open the door and go in front of everyone. So he says that you can imagine how blushed and how frightened he was. So he says, but as he opened it, nothing happened. M. Hamel saw him and said very kindly, go to your place quickly, little Franz. We were beginning without you. So he says that he jumped into the bank, sat over his desk. So not till then, when he was like little normal, not so frightened, he says that he saw that his teacher was wearing his beautiful green coat, frilled shirt, and the little black silk cap, all embroidered. That he used to wear that everything only on the inspection or on the prize days. And besides, apart from this, whole school was seeming strange to him, strange and lonely. So he says, but the thing that has surprised him most was to see that on the back benches there were the old men of the village, like old Hauser. Hauser is someone who provides shelter, protection. With his three-cornered hat, the former mayor, the former postmaster, and several others besides. Now he says that everybody looked sad, and the Hauser had brought an old primer thumbed at the edges. Old primer is like a very basic book from which you can learn how to read, or very basic book for a particular language is called a primer, right? So thumbed at the edges means which is used quite often, or is like very used. It looks like very used. and he held it open on his knees. So he held it open on his knees with his great spectacles lying across the pages. Now he says, while he was wondering all about it, M. Hamel sat in his chair, right? And then he says that in the same grave and gentle tone, grave means very sad and very sweet tone, that he used to me, he says that, my children, this is the last lesson I shall give you. The order has come from Berlin to teach only German in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. The new master comes tomorrow. This is your last French lesson. I want you to be very attentive. So hearing this, it was like a very startling and very unexpected for France, and he felt so sorry. And then he thinks, oh, the wretches, that was what they had put up on the town hall. Then he realizes, oh, the wretches, I mean, oh, the miserable, wretches means the miserable person, oh, the wretches. So the guy who was actually saying, you will reach school in plenty of time, he actually realized that this is the last French class, there is no point of hurrying to this. And then he is like shocked that it is his last French lesson. Why? Because he hardly knew how to write, and he now realized that he would be never able to learn anymore. And then he says that he should stop there then. And then he felt so sorry for not learning his lessons, for going to see birds' eggs, or going sliding on the Saar. Saar is the name of a river, and sliding on the Saar means he goes to the valley of the river to perform some kind of sporty activity. And then he says that my books, that had seemed such a nuisance, that his books used to make him feel good. A little while ago, he used to feel that it's so heavy to carry. And then his grammar, his history, and of saints, he says that everything is like old friends now. And M. Hamel too, the idea that he was going away and he should never see him again, he said that it made him forget that how cranky he was. Cranky means irritating, annoying. So he says he sympathizes, poor man. It was in honor of this last lesson that he had put on his fine Sunday clothes, that he realizes that because of the honoring the last lesson that he is going to give, he was wearing his finest clothes. And now he understood why the old men were sitting at the back benches, because it was their way to because they were feeling sorry too, and it was their way of thanking M. Hamel for his 40 years of faithful service, for showing respect for the country that was theirs no more, right? And he says while he was thinking all about this, then his name was called, and it was his turn to recite the rule of participles, and that's what he was trying to avoid, and he had to recite it all clear without one mistake. But he got mixed up onto the initial words itself, and then he was standing there, his heart was beating, and he didn't dare to look up. And then M. Hamel says to him that, I won't scold you, little Franz, that you should feel bad enough. See, then he says that how it is that every day we always say to ourselves that we have plenty of time, I will learn it tomorrow. Then he says that Alsace, this is the problem of Alsace, that she keeps on she puts off learning till tomorrow, that she delays learning until tomorrow, right? So he says that now those fellows out there, now he talks about the Prussian guys, now he says that those Prussian guys will have right to say that you call yourself Frenchmen. Now you can neither speak nor write your own language, right? So he says to France, but you're not the worst, France. That we all, then he says that we all have to take the blame of, I mean, of the burden of the blame of not learning French. He says that your parents were not excited enough to have you learn. Then he says that they preferred to send you to the field so that you could earn some more money. Then he says that I have to be blamed as well, because he says that that haven't he had sent him to water his flowers instead of learning the lessons. And then he says that haven't he gave him like a holiday when he wanted to go fishing. And then he says that from one thing to another, he kept on talking about the French language, and he said that it was the most beautiful language and the most clearest, the most logical. And he says that we must guard it among us and never forget it. Then he says, because when a people are enslaved, as long as they hold fast to their language, it is as if they had the key to their prison. Hold fast to means you remain tightly, you are like you know your language. Absolutely, that would be like hold fast to their language. They said because when the people are enslaved, like when somebody tries to enslave you, as long as they hold fast to their language, as long as they know their language, it is as if they had the key to their prison. That means it is, what restriction could they make? They are saying that you cannot speak the language, but if you know the language, you don't have to worry, because the language won't die. You can still pass on to your generations. If you know how to read and write into your own language, your language will actually survive, right? Even does not matter that they allow you to study the language at school or not, but the language will be alive, right? Because you would be able to pass on to that language. You know the language. Now he says, that's why he says it is as if they had the key to their prison, right? Then he opened a grammar and read us our lesson. Now he says that he understood the lesson so well, everything seemed so easy, and he thought that as if M. Hamel had never tried to explain everything that way earlier ever. So he says that it was looking as if he wanted them to learn everything. He wanted them to teach everything he knew, and then before going away, everything into our heads at one stroke. Then he says that after grammar they had a lesson in writing, and then that day M. Hamel had brought new copies for them. It was written in beautiful round hand. So round hand is a style of writing in which every letter have clear rounded shapes, right? So it was written France, Alsace. So he says that it looked like the flags floating everywhere in the schoolroom, hung from the rod at the top of our desks. Now he says you ought to have seen, you should have seen, everyone was set to work. He says that once what happened was some beetles flew in, but nobody paid any attention to them, right? He says not even the littlest ones mean even the very little guys who were just about to start to learn the language, who didn't even know the alphabets, so who worked right on tracing their fish hooks. So there is an alphabet in French which actually looks like a fish hook, right? So he says that they were actually practicing their alphabet as if it was French too, as if they learned the fish hook, this is like the language itself, right? So he says that on the roof the pigeons cooed very low. So he says he meant that the pigeons cooed very low. It looks like as if the pigeons are sad as well. And then he says that I thought to myself, will they make them sing in German, even the pigeons? Now he means that that the pigeons, when he said the pigeons cooed very low, then he wants to say that the pigeons are French and they cooed very low. That means they are sad. Now when he says will they make them even sing in German, so he says no, they will still keep cooing the way they were cooing before. So here he wants to say is that not everything they can control, right? That they would still remain French no matter what. And whenever I looked up from my writing, he says that he saw M. Hamel, who was sitting motionless in his chair, and he was gazing at one thing, then at another, as if he wanted to fix everything in his mind and how it looked into this particular classroom. And there was a window and there was a garden in front of his class, and I could see the garden from the window. So he says that only if, I mean, it has been like this, like for all the 40 years, it had been always like them. That only changes were that the desks and benches had been worn smooth. Okay, worn is like something is damaged. Smooth, now what does that mean? So when there are, especially the school desks, if they are wooden school desks and used like for a long time, the edges, the bench, everything gets smooth. But this is actually worn, right? It's not actually in the original way it was when it was like just made, but with time it just gets smooth. So it is worn, but it has grown smooth. So I don't know if you would have seen some of things like that back into some school, some old school, right? You could find it very easily. And then he says that only this was a change, and then he says the walnut trees in the garden that he had were actually taller than before. And then he says the hop vine, there was a hop vine which he planted himself, M. Hamel planted himself, that had grown like beyond even that had like even doubled in the length. So he says that this all would have broken his heart, right, to leave it all. And then they could hear his sister moving about the room above, who was packing their trunks, and for they must leave the country the next day. But he says that M. Hamel had the courage to hear every lesson to the very last. So after the writing, they said they had a lesson in history, then the babies chanted their ba, be, bo, be, bo, boo. These are the phonic sounds. And then when the babies were singing this, the old Hauser was opening their primer, he was also singing along with them. It was so funny watching him sing that they all wanted to laugh. And then he says, and finally the church clock struck 12, and there was Angelus. Angelus is the prayer there which happens like 3 times a day, once in the morning, then at the noon, then and after the sun is set. So then he says, then he stood up in his chair very pale, and he says that I never saw him look so tall, that he looked so confident, and he had so much respect for him. And then he says that he said, "My friends, but something choked him. He couldn't say a word." So he turned towards the blackboard, took a piece of chalk, and uh, and he struggled, but he wrote with all his might. He wrote with all his might, and he wrote as large as he could. He wrote, "Vive la France." So it says, "Long," literal meaning is "long live France." Then he stopped, he leaned his head against the wall, and he said that without a word, without saying a word, he made a gesture with his hand to say that the school is dismissed, you may go. Right. Very heart touching story. Yeah, it is sad actually. Thankfully, we don't have such wars these days. It could happen, but I think I wish you may not. Okay, what was Franz expected to be prepared with for school that day? Participles. What did Franz notice that was unusual about the school that day? It was all silent. There was no hustle and bustle. There were no lessons repeated in unison. What had been put up on the bulletin board had the news that French would no longer be taught in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. Instead, they would be taught German. So what changes did the order from Berlin cause in school that day? That everyone was sad, everyone wanted to learn French, like everything about it, and M. Hamel was very sad. He was wearing his his fine clothes for delivering that last lesson, and everyone was so attentive into the class that day. How did Franz's feeling about M. Hamel in school change as soon as he came to know that it was his last French lesson, and he grew sympathetic for his instructor, for his master? The people in the story suddenly realize how precious their language is to them. Yeah. What shows you this? Why does this happen? Because when we have things, we do not realize that we have the opportunity to actually learn them. For example, Sanskrit. Suppose something happens someday and we are banned, and someone realizes that this language, okay, for instance, just a hypothetical situation, someone realizes that this language has something, or the Vedas written in the language, or some scriptures written in the language are like so powerful that could just help you with something, blah blah blah. Okay, so in that scenario, and the higher authorities actually ban rest of the people from learning it, what will happen is we will strive for it. Right now we have the opportunity to actually go through it, but we never give it a shot. But we think it's okay, we'll do it tomorrow, or France thinks, will they make them sing in German even the pigeons? So we covered it. When the people are enslaved, as long as they hold fast to the language, it is as if they had the key to it. Perfect, yes. Now it says, can you think of examples in history? Now this is the question, not the previous one. You don't have to explain that one. It says, can you think of examples in history where a conquered people had their language taken away from them, or had a language imposed through them? Yes. So such an incident, what I remember is that when my grandfather, yeah, so when my grandfather was growing up, he actually learned everything was in Urdu, right? But he used to speak Punjabi, but everything he studied, with the schools, Urdu was imposed, because after the Mughals came, nobody was actually there there was no Punjabi instruction in Punjabi, and that is actually Gurmukhi. There was no instruction in Gurmukhi, but in Urdu. So I remember my grandfather's phone book was always organized in Urdu. That was the language he was like fluent in. And the other languages he could study. He could study Hindi, he could study Gurmukhi, that is Punjabi, he could study English as well. But slowly, he used to take it like bite by bite. Yeah, so yeah, there in the history we have been forced to leave our language and learn some other language. What happens to a linguistic minority in a state? Do you think they can keep the language alive? Of course. What happens is, like, if you're a linguistic minority, what happens is you cannot learn, your young ones cannot learn their language outside of their home. So what you can do is you can actually teach them there at home. So for example, I grew up in Madhya Pradesh, and I learned, obviously I have grown up learning Hindi, English and Sanskrit. I mean Sanskrit, like, good, not a lot but still good. Yeah, I remember so many things to this day. I think I found the best teachings of my life from Sanskrit, from Niti Shlokas, and I know them even to this day. I can write it down for you. So okay, so what the thing is, what I was saying, so I grew up there. So my grandfather, actually, I learned Punjabi through him. So there was a primer for like all of the how to write each of the letter alphabet in Punjabi, and then there was a Hindi version of that. So it helped me, and there comes the English version as well, but Hindi versions are more clear, because you know the basic difference between English and Hindi. English, you don't read it as the way it is, but Hindi you cannot read it otherwise. It is what it is. And one great thing about Punjabi is there is no half letter in Punjabi. Every alphabet is complete. There is no space for any half letter. So school is not school, it is school. Okay. And so you can, is it possible to carry pride in one's language too far? Well, yes or no, actually. I mean, all languages have their significance, right? According to me. Why? Because why is a language important? What is language? Language is actually important for communication. Second thing, language holds your history. Okay? It keeps it safe. So until you can actually read them, right? Until you are able to read them, it is of no use. The books that you cannot read, if I get a Chinese book, it's of no use to me, right? So similarly, if you know the language, it is of some use to you. Do you know that linguistic chauvinism, do you know what linguistic chauvinism means? Okay, linguistic chauvinism means that thinking that only this thing is the greatest and rest other things are not. So linguistic chauvinism means only this language is the greatest of the world's languages and the others are just like nuts. The way M. Hamel feels about French. So French and Sanskrit are almost similar languages. So yeah, I would say that, yeah, people generally thinks like that. Punjabis would say that Punjabi is a very wonderful language. People who speak Urdu would say Urdu is the one. Hindi would say Hindi is the one. English would say English is the one. And so many. These are just the basic languages, but there are so many other languages out there. So it's okay. Yeah. English is, I think the best thing is to know as many languages as you can. Learn as many languages as you can. Now it says that English is a language that contains words from many other languages, and because of this inclusiveness, it is one of the reasons that it is a world language. So it gives you examples. The petite is the French, kindergarten is German, capital is Latin, democracy is Greek, and bazaar is Hindi. Then it talks about, now it gives you that, find out the origins of the following words. I found some, so let me tell you. Tycoon is Japanese, tulip is Persian, logo is English, bandicoot is Telugu, barbecue is Spanish. Oh, I love barbecue. Veranda is started from Portuguese but ended up as Hindi, so is absorbed from in English from there, Hindi. Robot is Zek, and zero started from Arabic as Sifr, and then it transformed into Old Spanish and then actually Italian. Sky is Norwegian, Trek South African. Now it says, notice the underlined words in these sentences and tick the option that best explains their meaning. What a thunderclap these words were to me. Thunderclaps is startling, unexpected. When the people are enslaved, as long as they hold fast to their language as if they had the key to their business. Hold fast to means are attached to their language. Yeah. Do not go so fast. Don't go so fast. You will get to your school in plenty of time. Early enough. I never saw him look so tall. Then we'll go student seemed very confident. Okay. And now past perfect, we have already covered it in the tenses, so no need to go dig in over and over. In different ways, because that was the wonderful way. Write a notice for your school bulletin. Okay, we're not covering any notice here. Write a paragraph of about 100 words arguing for or against having to study 3 languages at school. This is wonderful. According to me, you should know as many languages as you can. You should learn as many languages as you can. That helps you. That helps to unite the world. Just think about that. Alrighty. Have you ever changed your opinion about someone or something that you had earlier liked or disliked? Narrate what led you to change your mind. Okay, you can write anything or about anyone as well, right? To me, it was like, I think about Canada. Yeah, I used to dislike it a lot when I was in my teenage, because every Punjabi wants to go to Canada. That's a reason, and I've seen many people going there, and I didn't want to go there because I think I didn't like them much. So with time, when after college, when I was struggling with jobs and doing so many things, trying to figure out and trying to do a lot, and then I finally, I don't know, there was a guy who actually helped my brother to come here. He worked for a firm, so then he gave that idea to my father that why not she can do better. And then he gave me the options that this is what you can do, this is what you can study, and that is how your future would be. And it seemed promising, so I migrated, and even then I wasn't sure enough, but with time I have fallen into love. I love this country. And also in this COVID situation, I feel so grateful that I was here, thankfully, because the government literally supported us like as if we were of their own, right? And that means a lot, to be counted as someone. That means a lot. Oh well, okay, so it's up to you. You can write about someone or something. Next, find out about the following: linguistic human rights, constitutional guarantees for linguistic minorities in India. Okay, linguistic human rights, that you have right to choose language for communication in a private or public atmosphere. You have right to conserve your language. Okay, and then constitutional guarantees include that you have right to establish and administer educational institutions of your own choice. I mean, this is for linguistic minorities. You have right to instruction in mother tongue. You have provision of facilities and advanced registration. So there are over 1369 languages, different languages in India. So languages were actually 1900 something, but when they just sorted into categories, and then they came up upon these many different mother tongues. Okay, so the Constitution of India says that every state must provide primary education in a mother tongue and also provide for the appointment of a special offer for the linguistic minorities. So yeah, actually when you see different states in India have different modes of instruction. Like in Punjab, reading and learning instruction in Punjabi is mandatory. In Marathi, in Maharashtra, Marathi. In Gujarat, Gujarati. So in several states. Now what they have done is they tried to divide the states according to the languages. Okay, this language is spoken in this state. Okay, one state. This language. But in spite of that, within the areas of the state itself, there are minorities. Like, for example, we were minorities in Madhya Pradesh. Makes sense, right? We were a linguistic minority. Overall, if you talk about the country, Punjab is a state where we cannot be a linguistic minority, but yeah, in Madhya Pradesh we were. So there were different provisions by the government who actually held because of that thing. There were things, yeah, like educational support. It was there for my sister. Yeah, she got it from the government for all her education, and that was great. They helped us a lot. Well, that's all for this chapter, and that's everything. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Bye bye.